is the new 2024 Fiat 500e, and it's the electric car that you want if you live in the city and you just want something affordable that doesn't have 1,000 horsepower or off-road capabilities or a video game system in the infotainment screen. You just want a simple electric car that doesn't take up much space and is affordable and plugs in. That's this. And today I'm going to show you all of the quirks and features of the new Fiat 500e. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. Cars and Bids has around 600,000 registered users, all excited to bid on and buy special cars like this and this and this and this. So, if you're looking to sell your enthusiast car, do it on Cars and Bids and reach a huge audience. All right, quirk time, and the 500e is very quirky. A good example, when you turn off this car, it plays Deck the Halls, the Christmas Carol, every single time. Take a listen. You can't change that. You can turn it on or off, but if you have it on, your only choice of exit music in this car, deck the halls with boughs of holly, no matter what time of year it is. Another quirk, getting out. You don't have a regular door handle, you have a button that you press. You push it, the door electronically pops open, and you climb out. That's weird, but weirder still, in this little panel where you pull the door closed, look closely, there's an inscription, made in Torino, with an image of the old school original Fiat 500. They have that on the driver's side and over on the passenger side, the door popper button and the Made in Torino image inside the door pull. And it's the same deal on the brake light, believe it or not. Look closely and you can see it says Made in Torino. Fiat clearly very happy with this car's Italian build and heritage, so they announce it everywhere. In fact, come back inside and in this little storage cubby, which looks just like a storage cubby, look closely and there is a city skyline. That's the skyline of Turin, Torino, where this car is built. A very hidden Easter egg, but it's there if you look very closely. And the quirks don't stop there. Look closely at the seat, and you'll notice the pattern imprinted into the seat is actually the Fiat logo over and over and over again. Fiat, 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 all over the seat bottom and the seat back. And how about my personal favorite quirk, this little panel on the front fender? It sticks out, it's clear, but inside you have the Italian flag. What is its purpose? There is none. It doesn't do anything at all. It just has the Italian flag protruding from the front side of the car for no apparent reason. Again, to underscore this car's Italian heritage and its cheeky quirkiness that makes it fun and cool. Now, all of that quirkiness, while certainly interesting, especially for a quirks and features channel like mine, actually has a purpose. In fact, it's a central theme in selling this car. Allow me to explain. So, the original Fiat 500, or at least the modern one, was sold here throughout the 2010s, but it went away after the 2019 model year. And in fact, there was a fully electric version of that Fiat 500 as well that was sold in some limited markets here in North America. Well, now the 500 has been revived for the 24 model year as a fully electric car, no gas engines offered. It starts around $34,000. It has about 120 horsepower and about 150 miles of fully electric range. And when you compare it against rivals, those numbers are not particularly compelling. For instance, the Nissan Leaf, the base model, has about the same range figure, but the price tag is $5,000 less, and it has 2 more doors. This car has roughly the same price tag as the Hyundai Kona Electric, but that car also has 2 more doors, more power, and 50 more miles of range. So value is not this car's greatest proposition, except that it's just so cool and quirky and fun looking. You don't look at a Nissan Leaf and say, ooh, interesting, I like it, but you might look at the circular, retro-styled, quirky, deck the halls Fiat 500 and say that, and you might choose one as a result. And indeed, Fiat realizes this car is not going to find mass market appeal. Instead, they told me they see the 500e as a car that's going to mainly be a second or third car for families or people who have a gasoline-powered car to drive around and do normal stuff, but maybe this is for smaller trips, inner-city errands. It's a relatively affordable little car, doesn't take up too much space. In fact, Fiat says this is the lightest in terms of weight electric car currently on the market, and it's also really short, only 143 inches long. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't qualify for federal electric vehicle tax incentives since it's made in Torino. You have to be built in the US to qualify, but the price tag is relatively low to start, and I have a suspicion there will be discounts and incentives available from Fiat. Also worth pointing out, these are all front-wheel drive and fast charging capable. Fiat says it can go from 0 to 80% charged in just 35 minutes. But on to the other quirks and features. First off, the trim levels are a quirk. There are 3 of them, and they are all called Inspired in one way or another. This is the base model, which is called simply Inspired, but the RED is capitalized, Inspired, because the base model 500, they're all red, and some of the proceeds from each purchase goes to HIV and AIDS charities. That's the red ribbon, hence Inspired Red. The other 2 trim levels are even more unusual. There's Inspired by Beauty, which only comes in rose gold and was debuted with Jennifer Lopez in a YouTube video. And then there's Inspired by Music, which has a 7-speaker JBL sound system that was specifically tuned by famous Italian tenor Andrea Botticelli. And those are your 500 trim levels. Now, on the outside, badging and lighting are certainly quirks of this car. I especially like the 500e badge in back, where 500 is silver, but then underneath it's blue, and the last 0 is also an E, which is a clever little touch. Well done, Fiat. Now, one interesting badging component of this car is up front, you don't have a Fiat badge. Instead, it just says 500, where you would expect the manufacturer's logo to be. Instead, you have the model name. Also notable up front, you have the circular lights that you saw in the previous generation Fiat 500 and of course on the original model in the 1950s and 60s. These are carried over into the modern age. Obviously they're full LEDs now, but they still give this car the same distinctive look that the Fiat 500 has always been known for. And in fact, overall, the shape of this car is very cute and very identifiable, which again is a main selling point of the car, Fiat hoping buyers will choose it because of its kind of cheeky, quirky, cool styling over regular, boring cars that don't have that. And next up, we move back inside the 500 for some more interesting quirks and features, starting with the seat, where beyond the Fiat logo imprinting, you also have 500 printed in red on the backrest, and then it even says red, since this is the Inspired Red trim level. Now, you can also see you have red piping going all around the seat, and you have red on the dashboard. The exterior color of the car, the paint, has been moved into the dashboard, so you get a splash of red even inside. Next up, the gear selection in this car, which is certainly a little unorthodox. It's buttons in the center. As you can see, park, reverse, neutral, and drive. Just choose your button and off you go. Now, in the center console, you also have a few buttons or dials here. You can see the volume dial is over on the right, or you can push it in and that will temporarily mute the stereo. In the center, you have your parking brake, fairly standard. And then on the left, you have your drive mode dial. Now, there is a rather interesting drive mode with this car. You have normal and then like energy conserving, but then there's a third drive mode called Sherpa. And that drive mode was named for the Himalayan Sherpas trying to get you up Mount Everest. In this case, Sherpa is an ultra-efficient mode that turns off the climate control and even limits your speed to maximize your driving range as much as humanly possible. Sherpa mode, definitely interesting. Now, on the subject of this center console, I have to say it's amazing how practical it is considering how small it is. Allow me to explain. You have 3 different charge ports in here: USB-A, USB-C, and a 12-volt cigarette lighter outlet style port. You also have a storage compartment right in here. Now, look above that and you have a center armrest. As you can see, you can lift that open and there's more storage. And at the front of this whole compartment situation, you have a fold-out cup holder that again adds even more practicality. Pretty impressive for such a small compartment. One other item worth pointing out in this interior, I mentioned earlier to get out you press a button and then the door electronically pops open. Well, in case that fails or in case the battery dies, there is a second manual release located down here in the door panel storage area. You can pull that and the door will mechanically open just like in a normal car. Now, beyond all that stuff, let's talk screens. You have this center screen, which is actually fairly large. It's standard on all new Fiat 500 models, and there's a lot to like here. I especially like on the main home screen, it tells you how long you have to charge until you reach 100% with various different types of charging. That's a pretty cool idea. I also like that this main home screen is heavily configurable, so you can choose exactly what you want to see displayed on your main home screen, which widgets you want to focus on. And the screen itself is relatively responsive and fairly intuitive. You have your controls off to the left that display where you want to go, your music, your navigation. The map is easy to use and move. It all works fairly well, reasonable, simple screen situation for using. Now, in the screen, you also have your climate controls integrated, but you don't have to use the climate controls in the screen. Mounted just below, there's a series of traditional buttons for changing the temperature, your airspeed, where the air is coming out, all that stuff, so you can manage all of your climate controlling without going into the screen. Now, there's one other screen worth mentioning in this car, and that's the gauge cluster screen, which at first glance looks fairly simple. It's small, it doesn't seem like it has all that much to it, but it's surprisingly configurable, actually. You can get it to show all sorts of different vehicle information, ranging from a trip odometer to your tire pressures, and you can have it show media, the songs you're listening to, satellite radio, Bluetooth, whatever. You can even have a map show up on this gauge cluster screen so you can see it directly below your line of sight if you're trying to navigate somewhere. It's actually all pretty nice. And in fact, the technology in this car is pretty good considering its small size and sort of base level positioning in the electric vehicle world. Cruise control, you only get regular standard cruise, no auto steering or adaptive cruise, but you do have an auto steer feature where if you start to drift out of your lane, the car will steer back for you. You also have automatic emergency braking, so it'll slam on the brakes if it detects an obstacle, and the backup camera quality is surprisingly crisp and nice, despite this car's small size and relatively good affordability. Now, as for the back seats, yes, this car has back seats. You can fold down the front seat and climb into the back, and they're back there, although they are tremendously small. As you can see, not a lot of space before your head hits the ceiling, not a lot of space before your knees hit the seat in front of you, and only 2 back seats. There's no center middle seat here. Instead, in the middle, you get a cup holder, one single shared between both rear passengers, and the Fiat 500 logo, repeated once again for the back passengers. Now, and it's the same situation with the cargo area. You lift up the tailgate, you got a cargo area back here. It is tremendously small, just like the back seats, and it includes the smallest cargo cover known to man. This tiny little thing, I guess, prevents people from looking inside and seeing what you have in there, but it's so small, it's crazy they even had to do it. Now, one nice benefit of this cargo area is because the rear seats are so close, it's very easy to fold them down. If you have something larger than this tiny cargo area, you want to stick it in, just push this button, fold the seat down, and then it's down. And of course, you can do it over on the other side too to maximize your cargo storing capabilities. And there's more cargo storage under the floor. You lift up the floor and there's a little extra room here. You can see currently the charging cable situation location is under the floor, gets it out of the way of the main cargo area and just a little extra spot to put it. Now, in some electric cars, there's a spot in the front trunk for the charging cables, but here there is no front trunk. You open up the front compartment with a flap in the driver's footwell, just like most cars, and then you can see it's all mechanical stuff in here. You don't get any extra front trunk space, even though this is an electric car. All your storage is back here. So with all that in mind, a lot of interesting quirks about the 500e. Let's see if it's as quirky to drive. All right, driving the electric Fiat 500. Been driving this car around actually now for a couple of days, and I gotta say, it's fine to drive, but it's not as exciting as I think some people think. The previous generation Fiat 500 had developed a reputation for being kind of a fun little toss it around car, and I think that was in part fueled by the Abarth model being so exciting and so, loud and fast and look at me, zippy and exciting and aggressive, frankly. This one, when I talk to people about it, they still think that it has that kind of reputation. Oh, the 500 must be so fun. But ultimately, this car is a fully electric 117 horsepower front-wheel drive automatic. It's not particularly thrilling to drive from an acceleration standpoint, and even from a handling and steering standpoint, it's not as quick as you might think. Now, it's fine for a little economy car. It is definitely zippier and kind of more exciting and more engaging than most little economy cars are, but I think even a Mini Cooper is a lot more exciting and engaging to drive. But I say all this to mention that I don't think this car should be on the list of people who have fun to drive as a main attribute for an electric car that they're looking for. I think this car is lightweight and small, and those are good benefits for people who want city life kind of electric car that's easy to park and use and drive. But in terms of actual zippy performance, etc., this car isn't really the top of the charts for that stuff. Now, with all that said, there is definitely a place for this car in the electric vehicle world, which is to say the kind of low-end cheap vehicle. I see the buyer of this car not as an enthusiast, despite the fact that the Fiat 500 has kind of been marketed as a sort of enthusiast-y choice in the past, but I see the buyer of this car as more of an older city-dwelling person, someone who still lives in town, their kids are all grown up, and they just want a little car that they can use for short trips here and there. Maybe this is someone who, walks to a local grocery store or something, but occasionally they gotta drive out of town for, a doctor's visit or whatever. This is the perfect car for that. It has a very small footprint, it's relatively affordable, especially with the kind of incentives that I have to imagine will start to come onto this car. It has decent technology, but it's not overwhelming, and it doesn't pack crazy stuff into an electric car like some of these cars do. Certainly it is not as engaging as you might hope it is when you hear the Fiat 500 is coming back. Ooh, they're making a new one. Is it going to be super fun? The answer is unfortunately not really. Now, one item worth pointing out is interior space. Obviously, I'm a tall person. I'm 6'4". I fit in this just fine. That's always been one benefit of the Fiat 500 because of its kind of bubble shape. Taller drivers can fit, at least in the front seats. The back seats are tighter. You don't have as much space, obviously, for your legs, but even your head kind of goes up against the hatchback. And again, the technology is not overwhelming in this car. And you do have a screen, and you have to use it for basic functions like the stereo. But it's not difficult to figure out. It's easy to use, like I mentioned. Everything in this car is fairly easy, fairly simple. There's no huge drawbacks except for the fact that the range is not significant, the performance is not significant. It really does have kind of a narrow band of people who I think are the target market for it, which is people who just want kind of a little car they can easily plug in and that just doesn't take up a lot of space or cost a lot of money to buy or to own. If that's you, this car definitely has to appeal, particularly over the Mini Electric, which has just dismal range figures, even compared to this car, which doesn't have great range figures as well. So that's who I think buys this car, and if that's you, I actually think it's a pretty reasonable car to consider. And so that's the new 2024 Fiat 500e, probably the most simple and basic electric car that you can buy today. If you want a new EV without all the complexity and features and stuff and price tag, this is the one to get. And now it's time to give the new 500e a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 44 out of 100, which places the 500e pretty low down against EV rivals. That makes sense as the 500e is impractical and somewhat expensive, but Fiat's goal here isn't to sell these in huge numbers to a wide audience. It's cute outside and inside, and it's meant for a very specific buyer, a city dweller looking for something that prioritizes cute and funky over practical and boring. In that arena, the 500e excels, and while that may not translate to big sales, I think the 500e will still find a happy audience who appreciates its existence.